Hey y'all, welcome to the channel. Today we're checking out Hadrian's Wall, the mysterious 38th parallel for Roman legionnaires and British barbarians. It's quite a title.
While the title of Great Wall quite rightly belongs to the 21,196 kilometers worth of stone strung across China, it is rather modern compared to what we're talking about today. While the earlier sections of the Great Wall date from the 7th century AD, much of the most recognizable parts were built from the 14th century onwards. But in this video, we're diving all the way back to a wall that was started in 122 AD at the very limits of the mighty Roman Empire.
Hadrian's Wall was built before the Great Wall of China? This is saying 220 BC, 122 AD. Wait. Yeah, that's after. I have to hear that part again.
While the earlier sections of the Great Wall date from the 7th century AD, much of the most recognizable parts were built from the 14th century onwards.
7th century AD is what he's saying is the earliest. Oh, 7th century BC, this is saying. So is that what he meant?
While the earlier sections of the Great Wall date from the 7th century AD,
this is saying 7th century BC. But it's Wikipedia, so I don't know. China Embassy Gov says 700 BC to 460. I think Simon meant to say BC.
But in this video, we're diving all the way back to a wall that was started in 122 AD at the very limits of the mighty Roman Empire. Hadrian's Wall runs for 117.5 kilometers, that's 73 miles, from the River Tyne on the east coast of England to the Solway Firth on the Irish Sea. Today, it is little more than a small wall, often no more than waist height, but in its day, it must have been a forbidding sight for the wild tribes to the north that the Romans had attempted to effectively shut out. This was by no means the first major wall of the ancient world. The walls of Jericho predate Hadrian's Wall by over 8,000 years, while the Theopetra Cave Wall in Thessaly in Greece dates from an astonishing 23,000 years ago. But when Hadrian's Wall was constructed, it was entirely unique in that it didn't defend a single city as many Roman walls did at the time, but rather acted as a lengthy border wall.
Going into this, all I really remember from school about Hadrian's Wall is that the Romans built it, like you said, and it was meant to keep the Northerners out. I think the Romans tried to conquer Scotland realm, but they couldn't, so they built a wall, right?
The Romans never built anything else quite like it, with one possible exception. You see, Hadrian's Wall was not the only wall that the Romans built across Britain. There was another, smaller, little-known wall, and I'll tell you all about it a little later in this video, but let's get into it.
I'm intrigued. Roman Britain.
The Romans arrived in Britain in 43 AD. We certainly know they didn't come for the weather or the food, but rather for good old-fashioned Roman conquest. By that time, the Roman Empire had enveloped almost all of modern Western Europe. The fearsome Germanic tribes had managed to hold off the Roman legions, with much of present-day Germany still outside of the empire. France, or Gaul, as it called itself back then, had been overrun, and now the legendary Roman army stood on the coast of France, eyeing, I'll just assume it was a clear day and you could see England from France for poetic value, their next target, Britannia. But this was...
Can you see Britain from France? Is he joking? Is that a dumb question? On a clear day, it is possible to see the opposite coastline of England from France. What? Oh, wow. I knew they were next to each other, but I didn't think they were that close. No wonder they wanted it then. They could see it right there. It was right there. Those beautiful white cliffs of Dover. I want that. Give me that. And they got it.
But this was not the first time that the Romans had sailed across the English Channel, and it would not be the first time that the Roman legions had locked horns with the Britons. Julius Caesar had invaded Britannia in both 55 and 54 BC and installed his own king, a man by the name of Mandubratius, along with a series of client kingdoms which were tribes that were aligned with Rome. But the Romans themselves withdrew back across the Channel and into mainland Europe. Things then remained relatively calm until 43 AD, when Roman Emperor Claudius instructed his legionaries to cross the Channel, this time for good.
Mandubratius. So why did it all fall apart? I'm trying to avoid Wikipedia, but sometimes it's the easiest to read. Did that guy maybe die and then or get overthrown by the Britons? What am I missing?
The main forces that had been assembled to defend Britain were soon routed by the well-trained Roman army, who soon turned their attention to what is modern-day Wales. Things were not as straightforward here, and the Welsh put up a fearsome resistance, but eventually it too was pacified. But not for long. With her fiery red hair billowing behind her as she rode her chariot defiantly at the Roman lines, Queen Boudica is a name that has gone down
I've
in
heard of
history
her.
as a true British folk hero. The wife of a recently deceased Celtic king, Boudica was cheated out of her late husband's will as the Romans forcibly removed her and her children from the land after flogging the queen and having her daughters raped. Her response? Well, that was to lead a thunderous revolt against the Romans. Perhaps caught off guard, the Romans were overwhelmed at what has come to be known as the Massacre of the Ninth Legion. It's thought that as many as 80% of Roman foot soldiers died in the battle, after which Boudica's army swarmed across Londinium, now London, Verulamium, St. Albans, and Camulodunum, Colchester, killing 70 to 80,000 people in the process. It was unbridled savagery, but it has done little to dampen Boudica's heroic image. Boudica and her army were eventually defeated, with the queen taking her own life, either through poison or her own weapon, we're not sure. The rebellion was ruthlessly crushed, but the Romans had been given a painful lesson of just how problematic the British tribes could be. It would, however, be a group further north that would cause the biggest problem of all.
Scotland. I learned about Boudica in another video. I think she was like in the northeast of England. Is that right? Norfolk. Or northeast relative to London, I guess. I guess she killed herself so she wouldn't be tortured by the Romans, maybe. But, you know, it's not over till it's over. Don't kill yourself. You don't want to do that. It's not over yet. Never give up. Never surrender. So the Romans showed up. They took over the south of England, which wasn't England yet, I guess. It was Britannia. And then they took over Wales after a lot of fighting. And then all this stuff with Boudica. But they finally got her. These Romans, y'all, they were just persistent. And they didn't give a f***. Scotland!
Anybody who's ever seen Braveheart will know that the Scots are a formidable foe when crossed. Combine that with the beautiful yet incredibly harsh landscape of the Highlands, and you begin to understand the difficulties of completely conquering an area like this one. By the end of the 1st century AD, the Romans had pushed up into modern-day Scotland with a series of defensive positions now occupying the Scottish lowlands. A series of military engagements, which unfortunately we don't know much about, occurred in 105 AD as the local tribe, known as the Picts, fought back ferociously against Roman rule.
We're already at 105 AD, and Julius Caesar originally sent his armies there in 55 BC, so this has been 150 years.
It appears that the Romans made a tactical withdrawal at this point by moving further south and establishing a new frontier at Staingate, an important Roman road that ran across the country roughly at the point of the modern border between England and Scotland. In 120 AD, Hadrian, the new Roman emperor, set out to tour his great dominion, and upon arrival in northern Britannia, he ordered a great wall be constructed at the point of the Staingate Road.
I wonder why it was right there. Why did they decide to draw that line there? He's saying they built a road. I guess that was the end of that was as far as they could push it. But I wonder why right there. What was there before? Did the Picts just say, all right, don't cross this line? Or is there a line drawn in the dirt? Why there? Vanity or necessity?
While the reason for building the wall might seem fairly obvious from the outset, it is a point that is still debated among historians. It's easy to assume that the wall was built simply to keep out the rebellious Picts to the north, but logistically it was a huge ask, not just to build it, but also to maintain it. Some have argued that the wall served more as an expression of Roman power and prestige, and was perhaps never meant to be the impenetrable wall we've long assumed it was meant to be. This was certainly an awkward time for the empire, with rebellions in Egypt, Judea, Libya, and Mauritania, all a world away from the windswept north of Britain, but no doubt the Romans were fearful of mass uprisings.
That's a lot of construction for a show of dominance or a show of power. That's a lot of work. But at the same time, these Roman emperors are really irrational, and they're used to getting everything they want.
Another theory is that it was built to control migration more than anything, but again, that's a lot of work and a lot of
Yeah.
stone for a glorified border. It was also very different to other areas around the empire where fixed boundaries were rare, or perhaps it was to do with taxation, a way of charging people to cross back and forth, which certainly did happen in
But
other parts of the
okay.
empire. The truth is that we just aren't exactly sure why the Romans decided to build their only major large-scale wall project, which didn't protect a particular city in the north of England.
Strange. Construction.
We believe that construction started on Hadrian's Wall in 122 AD and was completed at a fairly brisk pace in just 6 years. The wall was built from east to west, with all of the Roman legions in the country taking part. Slightly to the south was the Staingate Road, which had been constructed 30 years prior and almost certainly played a key role in the logistical support for the whole project. Along the road lay several forts, which would have protected those constructing the wall. It seems that initially the idea was to have 80 small gated castle or fortlets every Roman mile. That's 1.5 kilometers or about 0.9 miles today. This would be interspersed with pairs of evenly spaced intermediate turrets used for observation. If we want to be pedantic, the fortlets, which would have likely housed a few dozen soldiers in each, were often over or under the designated distance apart, most likely down to landscape features or where signaling would have been obscured. The majority of these castles were built from wood and earth, though the turrets were made of stone. These turrets lay roughly 493 meters apart and had an internal area of 14 square meters,
Wow.
slightly smaller than your average parking space.
This is turning out to be an even bigger project than I realized in the beginning. I guess I knew that it was probably a little taller than the way it is today because you could just climb over it. So it had to be a little bit taller, but I didn't know it had things like this. This is essentially a castle. Those walls are thick. They're building arches. They're building places for soldiers to live, barracks. That's a big thing. That's a lot. And it's actually really brilliant now that I'm looking at it because if you could still cross, but the only way to cross is to go through this checkpoint.
The main wall itself was around 4.6 meters high and was initially constructed with a clay-bonded rubble core
15
and
feet.
mortared dressed rubble-facing stones, which is a technique still used today to give the impression of an old worn stone wall, but it seems that this technique made it vulnerable to collapse and it was frequently repaired with a mortared core.
Okay, the valum.
Another interesting aspect from the area comes not from something that was constructed, but rather excavated. Standing to the south of where the wall ran, it's impossible to miss the extensive ditch that follows the wall line in both directions. Known as the valum, this earth rampart stretches practically from coast to coast, hugging Hadrian's
Wow.
Wall all the way, though exact distances vary from directly next to it to as much as 700 meters away. The purpose was almost certainly an extra line of defense, though intriguingly, it again remained completely unique throughout the Roman Empire and along its borders. The ditch is roughly 6 meters wide and 3 meters deep with a flat bottom. On either side are two mounds about 6 meters wide and 2 meters high, around 9 meters from the ditch itself.
That's a lot of digging. A lot of digging. That may almost have been more work than building the actual wall. That's so much dirt. It goes all the way across the country. Forts.
It seems that the Romans were not against the odd change of plan along the way. Not long after construction had ended, around 128 AD, it was decided that 14 large-scale forts would be added along the wall, each of which would house between 500 and 1,000 auxiliary troops. However, it seems that a number of them were built directly over some of the castles.
500 to 1,000 troops. Wow. I didn't realize it was such a big production.
However, it seems that a number of them were built directly over some of the castles or turrets. Whether this was down to a misjudgment in the defensive needs or simply
sufficient.
reorganization, again, we just don't know. Very little remains of these forts today, with a few exceptions. One, built around 124 AD, lies close to present-day Bardon Mill in Northumberland and has been associated with a variety of names over the years. It was also close to a small civil settlement where the ruins are still visible today, including the so-called murder house where 2 skeletons were discovered beneath the floor, laid well after the construction of the building. Another of the better-preserved forts is Salernum,
that looks
located
good.
within the grounds of the 18th century country house Chester's. This was a particularly important fort as it housed one of the Roman cavalry units, as well as
Wow.
guarding a bridge across the North Tyne River.
You can sort of see how they would live. Oh my gosh. That is crazy. They've got a little irrigation ditch there. Is that what that is? toilet. It is amazing that these stones have been there so long. Hundreds of years. 1,000 and something, right?
Today, you can still walk through what was once the baths, the barracks, the officers' quarters, as well as the outposts. A church nearby includes 4 columns that look remarkably Roman-like, and sadly this is often what became of Hadrian's Wall and its forts. Much of the stonework from the wall itself was used for roads during the 18th century, and the Salernum was even purposefully covered up during the same period for
Well, that's a shame.
landscaping and design purposes, before a descendant reversed the decisions and the
I mean, that's a shame that they used the stones and kind of tore it down, but at the same time, they're right there. And if you need to build a road, I mean, might as well use that stuff, right? I guess.
Lastly is the fort at Vindolanda, again near its present-day Bardham Mill, which remains in not only remarkably good condition, but was also the site of one of the most exciting discoveries in Roman Britain. Roughly around the size of a postcard, the Vindolanda tablets are a set of wooden leaf tablets discovered in 1973 on the grounds of the Vindolanda fort. At the time, they represented the oldest surviving handwritten documents in Britain and covered a huge variety of topics, from the construction of new forts to an invitation to a birthday party held in 100 AD.
So, wow, it's amazing to think that people were living their lives. I mean, were they just soldiers? Or did the soldiers have families that came to stay there with them? Probably not, right? But if they're there forever, they're stationed there, and they're having birthday parties. Many civilians lived in and around the forts on Hadrian's Wall, so surely they had lovers and families. Amazing. I didn't know it was such a big deal. I gotta check out Hadrian's Wall. I gotta go see this stuff.
Emperor Hadrian died in 123 AD and was replaced by Antonius Pius, who apparently wasn't satisfied with the current wall arrangement. He ordered that a second wall be constructed 160 kilometers to the north, which became the Antonine Wall. The 63-kilometer wall ran from Old Kilpatrick in West Dunbartonshire on the Firth of Clyde to Caradon near...
I've never heard of this wall. My gosh. Wow, it looks very similar to Hadrian's. Wow.
The 63-kilometer wall ran from Old Kilpatrick in West Dunbartonshire on the Firth of Clyde to Caradon near Bowness on the Firth of Forth. This was a turf wall built upon stone foundations that roughly measured 3 meters high and 5 meters wide. It came with 16 forts built along it, as well as the curious Arthur's Own, believed to be
3 meters high. Okay. Almost 10 feet tall. All right. So that would be hard to climb over. Maybe.
This was a turf
By
wall
yourself?
built upon stone foundations that roughly measured 3 meters high and 5 meters wide. It came with 16 forts built along it, as well as the curious Arthur's Own, believed to be a Roman temple in the shape of a beehive, which is sadly no longer standing. The reasons behind the Antonine Wall are a little mysterious. We can presume that it was constructed to help placate the tribes further north, but it's clear that it provided far less protection than the much better-built Hadrian's Wall to the
It's
south.
smaller.
The Antonine Wall took 12 years to construct and was abandoned just 8 years after its completion. This wall garners far less attention than Hadrian's Wall, probably for the simple fact that there's not much of it left, but it was still quite an achievement.
Wow. Never heard of it. The end of Roman Britain.
If Emperor Antonius had planned on pacifying the northern tribes, he failed. The next emperor, Marcus Aurelius, abandoned the Antonine Wall and spent considerable time strengthening Hadrian's Wall instead. Over the next few centuries, there was little change. No doubt on several occasions Roman legions marched north to flex their muscles, but it seems that this line more or less remained the extremity of the Roman Empire for around 400 years. That is, until 410 AD, when the Romans departed Britain. The causes of this were wide-ranging, from barbarian invasions to military coups, as well as a general economic downturn. The empire was in complete disarray, and Rome itself was sacked in 410 AD. Over the next century, it would split in two, and by the end of the 5th century, the mighty Roman Empire was but a shadow of its former dominant self.
So the wall was built in 100s. They abandoned it in the 400s, so they were there for like 300 years, basically. Generations of people were born, raised, lived at the wall. What a life. Living next to this wall, and you can't go on the other side. I guess, could they go on the other? They could. They could do whatever they wanted. They were the Romans. But yeah, I wonder what security was like. If you're like a kid playing ball, your dad's a soldier, your mom is making bread, and you kick your ball over the wall, you got to go through one of those checkpoints and be like, yeah, I got to go through. Got to get my ball. Would they just say, yeah, go ahead? Or would it be like off limits? Or would you need like a soldier to escort you over there to get the ball? These are probably really dumb questions. I'm just curious what life was like next to this wall. And this does remind me of Game of Thrones, you know, the wall. It must be where they got it. So basically, Game of Thrones is saying that the Scottish are White Walkers. There are a lot of redhead Scottish people, aren't there? No hate, gingers. I have a red beard, so I'm one of you. I get it. The other Great Wall.
As I said at the start of this video, Hadrian's Wall struggles to match the Great Wall of China. We don't see the hugely impressive towers or the huge, almost intact walls that
It's not far
wind
off,
through
though.
the hilly landscape. Hadrian's Wall requires much more of an imagination. Some of it still remains,
Right.
but you need to stretch your mind to see it in its full glory. This wasn't the first ancient wall to be constructed, but it was the first of its kind to run for such a length. The fact that nearly 2,000 years later you can still walk beside it from coast to coast is a testament to the extraordinary building work
Yes.
done by the Romans.
Yes, it
Standing
is.
beside it on a windswept, chilly day, you can imagine the Roman legionnaires who did exactly the same thing nearly 2,000 years before, staring north into the great unknown and wondering if the fearsome Picts, naked and with blue paint covering their bodies, would appear.
Amazing. Going into this, I had no idea that Hadrian's Wall was such a big production. And people lived there? And that there were families there? 14,000 troops, but also women and children, little communities. That Roman persistence is no joke. I mean, if you've seen like the way the Romans were trained to fight, where they all had shields and spears, it was this choreographed thing that kind of matches their overall strategy of just waiting the enemy out. Just keep pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing, emperor after emperor after emperor, but they couldn't beat the Scottish. That is amazing that the Scottish were able to, or the Picts were able to resist. They couldn't beat the Picts. Are the current day Scottish people descendants of the Picts? The current Scottish people, the Picts and the Gauls. Gales? Gauls? I don't know how to say that word.
Gale.
Gale.
Gael.
Gale.
Gael.
Gale.
Gael.
Okay. It is really gorgeous. I would love to see it in person. It's amazing that it's still there. And if it wasn't for people taking the stones to build roads, it would probably still be there in a more substantial way. Yeah, look at that. Oh, that would be so cool. Yeah, I need to go there, y'all. I want to go to Liverpool and here. This was really cool. Thank y'all for recommending this video. Thank y'all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Later.